I'm going to get this right out of the way at the beginning here because I can't even explain. I was just explaining to Dan Mahar how much this pains me, but I am the kind of guy that thinks in a certain way and likes things orderly and chronological and a whole bunch of other things. And in this case, we are, thanks to the travel schedule that I have in the first round of the OHL playoffs, recording before we can get some results that may end a couple of series in the East. It's still going to come out on Tuesday morning, this episode, for the sake of consistency, right? That's when you expect the episode, but it's not going to be as up to date as I would like. It pains me, but it's the way it's got to be. We're going to have to live with that. And I think we've got lots of good content to share with you this week on the OHL podcast. So with that said, Dan Mahar, we do have the Barrie Colts, as we speak, trying to extend their series with the Oshawa Generals to a 7th game. And in about 15 minutes from our time of recording, the Ottawa 67s will look to, on home ice, close out the Brantford Bulldogs. Let's start with the Barrie Colts, because in our text messages to get ready for this episode of the OHL podcast, that was a team that we both wanted to talk about, and why not? Last week I said, did Sudbury make a statement with its opener, taking the first 2 games of the series versus Mississauga? Well, the Barrie Colts have already taken 2 games in this series versus Oshawa. I picked the Gens in a sweep. The Colts are playing some good hockey here.
Yeah, I had given them a game on the acknowledgement that I thought they really showed something down the stretch. I thought they had a disappointing year, and then the final month or so after the trade deadline settled and some of the new players got acclimatized to what they were trying to do there, I actually thought they were scrappy and in every game and winning some games, and mentioned some of the names down the stretch that were really carrying them. But I think you get to the playoffs and you find pretty much every player in that team is pulling in the right direction, but we have to start with the goaltending. Sam Hillebrandt's been phenomenal for that team, keeping them in every game and then some. But it's not. But there's up and down the lineup just that playoff warrior mentality, right? They're getting contributions from some unlikely sources, which is what you need at playoff time. And I think wouldn't blame Oshawa for maybe being a little overconfident coming in, so maybe caught off guard a bit early in this series. But I don't think when you're playing a game 6 that you're too overconfident anymore. So, but a huge tip of the cap to those Barrie Colts, because they showed something down the stretch that they were scrappy, and it's continued into the playoffs. So regardless how this turns out, you got to tip your cap to Barrie, don't you?
You certainly do. And you mentioned it's hard to be overconfident when you're entering a game 6 on the road, no less. Remember, Oshawa had the chance to close it out in game 5 and they got shut out. And if you really want to start splitting some hairs, we could make the argument that there was a video review that went against the Colts in game 2 of this series that prevents Barrie from being up 3-2 with a chance to close it out on home ice as we record this episode of the OHL podcast. So I think there's a lot to like. You touched on one of the things that certainly stood out to me, and that is the play of Sam Hillebrandt, who is absolutely showing that he is a money goaltender for the Barrie Colts. And the other thing that stands out is just good old-fashioned hard work. Marty Williamson has got these guys buying into what he's selling there as the head coach, and they are working their tails off. And they often say that luck is the residue of hard work, and hard work, if you're playing the game the right way and you're working harder than the other team, skill notwithstanding, you're going to be successful more often than not. So I love the work ethic we're seeing from the Barrie Colts in this first round series. I also checked in with my buddy Gene Pereira, who covers the Colts for BarrieToday.com, and he went further to identify Bodie Stewart and Zach Weigel as players that have really stood out to him. Weigel, he says, is playing the best hockey of his career, while Bodie Stewart has found another level. So thanks to Gene, who's obviously got eyes on the series. And one other thing that I had completely forgotten, Dan, in all of this, no Bo, and yet that is Bo Akey. And I know he hasn't been around for 2/3 of the season, but this Barrie Colts is giving this scare to the first place Oshawa Generals, even without Bo Akey. So again, the results of the game being played as we record this notwithstanding, the Barrie Colts have really come out to play and shown that there's a little something there at the Sadlin Arena.
great point on Boaki, and not just Boaki, but the injury to Boaki probably triggered Edward Chalet and Olivier Savard to Kitchener. It triggered Jacob Frasca to Sioux, triggered Connor Punnett to Oshawa, whom they're playing. So a whole lot of the core of that team disintegrated around the trade deadline based on that. And we had Brendan Sirazati supposed to come over, decided wasn't really interested in that trade after the fact. So a whole lot went down around the trade deadline for the Barrie Colts that looked like it was just a train wreck. So what do you do with the train wreck? Well, they extinguished the flames in a hurry, got the train right back on the tracks, and they got to be given a lot of credit for that. And you mentioned a couple names there that are unsung heroes. I look at a lot of the talent up front too. We talk about I love the trigger that Bo Jelsma has. I love Riley Patterson's been next level the second half of this year for me. So there's just a lot of players that I think looked around that room, said, "Yeah, we sucked a lot of talent out of this room, but let's fill the void." And whoever the leadership group is in that room, big credit to them, and the depth players as well. You're making a name for yourselves, and some of you are going to hear names called in the NHL draft as a result.
Riley Patterson for sure is a player that's turning heads as we head into the June draft. There's no question about it. Let's stay with the East in a series that we do know is over, and that's North Bay knocking off Kingston in 5 games. So do we say, Dan, no Anthony Romani, no Dom DiVincentis, no problem for the Battalion?
For the Battalion, sure. I'd say problem for Kingston. I gave them 7 games. I thought North Bay was going to be too strong for them. I think we both did. You obviously had this right on the nose. Well, you had, I think, 5 games maybe, but which was right on the nose. So North Bay we knew was strong. I think if you had told me North Bay without their top goal scorer as well as their all-world goaltender, and then eventually their captain on a suspension, I thought these all might add up to, wow, Kingston has a shot in this. But I mean, the only word I could use to describe Kingston's output in this series was just disappointing. And I know you flagged to some extent that goaltending might be a concern for them, which it was, but I don't think this is on Vakari and net. I think there's a team-wide issue here with the additions they made this year. They should have put up more of a fight than they did against a wounded North Bay team.
Yeah, there was just something that didn't work in the chemistry, I guess, for the Kingston Frontenacs. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I always come back to the fact that it was one of the teams, along with the Niagara Ice Dogs, Sioux Greyhounds, that were in the running for the Memorial Cup hosting opportunity that ultimately went to Saginaw. So whatever it was in Kingston, I don't think injuries helped along the way. And I certainly think goaltending was an issue they would have liked to have been able to address. But your point's well taken. I'm not hanging this on Mason Vakari by any stretch. On the goaltending front, I think it's at least notable to talk about Easton Rye in North Bay, just because McIver has to come in when DiVincentis goes down to carry the mail for the North Bay Battalion. But there you have backing him up for a game in North Bay, Easton Rye. And what a story this not even yet 18-year-old kid has become in the Ontario Hockey League this year. He's a Peterborough native, and he's been playing largely with the Lakefield Chiefs up in the PJHL, but I think he finished with 7 or 8 games with the Petes this year, also called in an emergency situation to play for the Erie Otters. And also in one of those games he played with the Peterborough Petes, he stopped that London Knights winning streak. It was still part of their, I think, 23 undefeated in regulation, but Easton Rye, his first OHL win is a 40+ save performance, winning in a shootout. I mean, what a season this young man has had. And there he is backing up McIver for North Bay in a playoff game. So 3 OHL teams along with the Lakefield Chiefs. I think a little tap of the stick to Easton Rye on this podcast too.
Imagine the stories he's going to have for his kids in 20 or 25 years, right? And I think Easton Rye is the Pete Davidson of the OHL, right? Every time you turn around, he's dating someone new. There's a good reference for you, Mike. Yeah, but yeah, what an incredible year and amazing stories for him. But yeah, it's kind of the suitcase warrior of the league, is it not?
It certainly is. It certainly is. Okay, the other series that may wrap up tonight may not, and if it does not, you and I were both right in saying it would go 7 games. And I think we both picked Brantford in 7, didn't we? But the Ottawa 67s do have a chance to wrap this thing up tonight. And frankly, even though we both said long series, 7 games, I'm not sure I saw it going 3-1 Ottawa. And then again, boy, oh boy, if we want to get into this stuff, is a bad call something that cost Ottawa in game number 5 or a bad review? I don't know. They're playing game 6 right now, but not the way I expected this series to arrive at a 6th game. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well put. I think I noted in our prediction podcast that that series was by far the hardest one for me to predict. It gave me all kinds of pause. I was not confident picking either teams, and I'm still not saying that I regret the Brantford pick. I think both teams have been really strong in this series. It's had a bit of everything. It's had some controversial calls. It's had some controversial hits. It's had some wild goaltending nights where it just seems like everything on net was going in with some rebounds the next game from the goaltenders. So it's everything you want in playoff hockey. But I will just say, from the standpoint of seeing Ottawa go up 3-1 and now 3-2, and who knows how this is going to end. But I really struggled to pick against Ottawa just based on the strength of that roster. And I mean, I was trying to give all credit due to Hamilton because of the year they've had, the team Jay McKee's put together, just everything they've done this year. But when you look at that other team, just up and down that lineup, every stop from the defense core to the third and fourth line, like they just have so many weapons to come at you. And anytime you shut someone down, you think, well, that guy had a quiet night. You turn around, you look, well, there's Stonehouse scoring. There's, obviously you're getting goals out of Pinelli, but on the back end, you had Sam Maillet with a hat trick. Yeah, you name it. There's just so many weapons in that Ottawa lineup that I don't think there was any way it was going to surprise me if Ottawa did win this.
I wonder for how much longer, and we'll touch on this more in this episode of the OHL podcast, but we'll continue making that Freudian slip of Hamilton as opposed to Brantford, which you just did, young man, but totally get it. But the Bulldogs, and I'm with you. I gave Brantford the edge in 7 because I kind of thought, well, here's a bunch of Cowboys that play really well and don't really know the situation they're in, so to speak, right? Like I know that they understand this, but what have they really got to lose, higher seed or not? This team, as we've talked about all year long, has been so well built. Some shrewd moves made by Matt Turk, the GM, that it's well ahead of schedule when you look at the cycle of junior hockey. So I thought, wow, let's throw caution to the wind and have these guys thinking, hey, we're playing on house money right now or borrowed time. But the hardest part for me in taking Brantford in 7, and it still might turn out that way, we don't know as we record this, but was picking against the Ottawa 67s. Because how do you do that with the reputation that the Barber polls have and how well James Boyd and Dave Cameron are running that organization? You already listed, the notable players to keep eyes on and why it's difficult to pick against them. We both went that way in a 7-game series, but if Ottawa wins, nobody would be surprised. Then you sit back and you say, well, that's what we expected, not only out of the Ottawa 67s, but maybe this crazy Eastern Conference this year. Like, who really would have thought? So Brantford, Ottawa is going deep, but Mississauga and Sudbury went much quicker than we would have thought. And North Bay and Kingston, okay, that was a 2-7 matchup that went about as quick as at least I thought it was going to go. Who would have thought, though, that the 1-8 with Oshawa Barrie would be one of the most compelling series in the East? So it just reminds us once again, Dan, that only fools make predictions.
Yeah, and we talked about the Eastern Conference, did we not, about how tight it was top to bottom? Like, how long ago before was Oshawa well down those standings? And someone commented to me at the game the other night, oh, it's surprising that the 6 seed's up on the 3 seed. I said, like, yeah, look at the standings. They're a couple, they're a millimeter apart in the standings. And some of the things you just referenced, and one of the things I mentioned when we were talking about Brantford, Ottawa, was the health situation on Brantford, which we know they're a little bit banged up coming in, missing a couple of key players, and that should or could be the difference. And Ottawa, on the other side, made some sneaky good additions. We talked about Braden Kressler. They add in the aforementioned Maillet, but you look at the killer M's on D. I'll include Colin McKenzie back there too in net. There's another M. They're just a wall back there, but they also have that offensive ability. They throw pucks on net, and that creates all kinds of opportunities for your forwards. So they're just a team that can come at you in so many ways that I think you and I both felt that if we're looking at dark horses to really pull something off in the playoffs, the Ottawa 67s had to be on that radar.
It's funny that you mentioned the standings and how tight they were, because we did talk about that. I'm going to give Stan Butler, the head coach in Erie, a whole lot of credit. He even fooled my broadcast partner on Kitchener Rangers games, because he's been talking the talk. Oh, wow, we don't expect to even be in these games. They finished 20 points ahead of us in the standings. It was the 13-point difference in the standings, fourth Kitchener, fifth Erie, and that Otters team was playing terrific hockey down the stretch. It's been a great series so far, and almost unbelievably, Dan, the only series left running in the West. The other three were all 4-game sweeps. London over Flint, Saginaw over Owen Sound, and then the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds over the Guelph Storm. Thoughts on what we saw on the Western Conference side?
Well, I guess you and I each got one sweep right. I had London, you had Saginaw, so we got those ones between both of us right. I think we each thought Guelph would be good enough to take a game or two, and in fairness, they probably were. Those were some tighter games than the 4-0 series score might indicate. But it really did highlight how good Sioux is. Again, they come at you every night. They don't take nights off, and that's indicative of all three of the top teams in the West. I think what you're seeing with the Erie Kitchener series is a little different. I think so far we've seen both teams take turns slumbering a bit in the first 4 games, play poorly for a period and a half while the other team took it to them. I think game 5 was the first really kind of complete game we saw from both teams, that both teams were probably happy with the effort throughout and got to overtime. It was a great game, great atmosphere, but there's 2 really evenly matched teams, so I'm not terribly surprised at the outcome. I think you and I both had that going 7, I believe, and it's shaping up like that could still be accurate. So I think that series was different than the other ones. We didn't necessarily expect sweeps, but we didn't expect they would be very competitive either.
I had the Rangers Otters series going 6, which it could
Oh,
end on Tuesday night, following all of the logistical hoops everybody's jumping through to avoid the crush of tourists in Erie when the eclipse rolls around on Monday, April the 8th. But, I want to try to give myself a little pat on the back. When I took London in 6, I thought that Flint, again, played some decent hockey in the second half of the season, wasn't trending the same direction Erie was when it all wrapped up at game number 68, but I thought would make life difficult. 3 of the 4 games were pretty tight. Flint even led in 2 of the final 3 games, but nonetheless, the London Knights, as expected, move right on. I know you wanted to touch a little bit on Owen Sound. Before you do that, let me just touch on Guelph, which I don't know. And we'll talk more about Chad Wiseman and his $500 suspension a little later in this episode, or $500 fine, pardon me, no suspension, a little later in this episode. Brace yourself, because I got a lot of thoughts around this, but the Storm are really interesting to me because you look at the roster, Dan. They've got 10 19-year-olds on that roster, and they went out in 4 straight games. Jake Carabella, Max Nemesnikov, Michael Bushinger. And of course, they're still counting Matthew Poitras, which, whatever, was still on the roster. And I will insist to you that the Poitras wild card was one of the biggest challenges the Guelph Storm had to deal with. But the bottom line is, you've got a roster with 9 19-year-olds on it. I think you're thinking you're going a little deeper than not just 1 round, but 4 games for sure.
It's a yikes for sure. When you I have trouble looking at those rosters that are really, and we'll talk about Owen Sound in a second, because we see those rosters that are really built for this year, built for the year you're in, and when they make an early exit, it's just so painful for the fan base and the management, because you look and you think, well, we're in for probably a couple hard years now, and Guelph had some things go wrong. You mentioned Matthew Poitras. What a huge piece that would have been to come back, but they didn't get him, and I think at least a couple months ago they were pretty sure they weren't getting him, so that ship needed to sail. Surely could have used Braden Hislop on the back end. That would have been an extra piece that they really could have used in that series. So they had a couple things not break their way. We know that Gillespie was battling a bit of an injury as well. So, but all these teams have a little bit of adversity, and we mentioned the Barrie Colts have had a ton, and look what they're doing in the playoffs. So you got to find it. You got to find a way. You got to overcome whatever you think of the officiating. You got to overcome all these things and just find a way to battle. And usually when you have rosters laden with 19-year-old talent, that's the type of team that can do it. So no matter how you slice up and dissect the Guelph Storm season, disappointment has to be the word that you would categorize it under.
Is Owen Sound equally disappointing? The thing that stands out to me is that they must have still believed at the trade deadline, based on the moves they made, moving Nico Addy out to bring in some grit on the back end and a young player in Sam McHugh, but he was at least on that roster for Peterborough, the OHL champions a year ago. They must have still thought they had something for whatever reason, Dan, and I cannot put my finger on it, but it just did not come together for the Owen Sound attack this year.
No, I would not say that they're equally disappointing. I would say they're more disappointing than the Guelph Storm. I mean, we referenced a few of the factors that you could attribute to Guelph's case. Owen Sound really had none of those. So Owen Sound, in some ways, reminded me of the Kitchener Rangers a year earlier, Mike, where the season wasn't going very well. The questions started to come up. Well, this team probably shouldn't be buying, even though it looked clearly like a buyer in training camp. But by Christmas, a lot of the league and a lot of the fans were saying, I don't think this team should buy. But they looked at the composition of the roster, still decided to buy, like you said, moved out Nico Addy and picks and brought in Connor Smith and Sam and McHugh from Peterborough. And you think, wow, those are playoff type players. They're really going to solidify this back end, make this team tough to play against. All they have to do is find down the stretch, kind of like Kitchener did after the coaching change the year before, right? Never happened, and you got to ask yourself why, because that team is loaded for bear. We talked all year about Colby Barlow and Denny Gour and Cedric Gandon, and you go on and on down that roster. It was a roster that should have given any team they played fits. It should have, and it just never clicked. So you have to start asking yourself why. Was it a misevaluation of talent? I would argue no, because those players delivered every other year they were in the league, and now they're just a year older. So does it come down to coaching? Was it goaltending? Surely was not goaltending. We saw the effort they got from Carter George, and when Votary came in to back him up, still played just as well. So you have to look at systems, motivation. What is it? Because there's something there that was rotten this year. The players, to me, looked like they had checked out a month or two ago, and that's a really bad sign for the ticket holders, for everyone else watching that. And I don't know what it was. I don't want to indict any of the players specifically because I've seen them do it before. I know they're great players there. So, but there's a lot of questions have to be answered this offseason for that attack team.
Yeah, and it's just it's one that's impossible. I think in the room, they know what went wrong. Outside the room, we just look at all of the things you talked about and probably more and scratch our heads. I mean, if we're going to go back to making predictions, I had the Owen Sound attack challenging the London Knights for the Midwest Division title this year. And of course, it was never close. But that's how much I liked the roster. That's how much I believed in the track record. And, speaking of those track records, not reaching 30 wins for the first time in more than a decade now in Owen Sound. So it'll be interesting. They've still got one of the best goaltenders in the league in Carter George. They've got some nice young pieces on that team. Colby Barlow can still come back and play for them again. Who knows? But they might have to just start stripping her down and looking at something brand new at the Bayshore. One more note I should have made earlier when talking about Flint Colson Petrie signing his entry-level contract with the Anaheim Ducks. Congratulations to him. Let's get into, Dan, some of the supplemental discipline that has been meted out over the past week, including 3 games to Matthew Mayich. We just learned that one today, so he's gone for the Ottawa 67s. The other ones that stand out to me, though, Liam Arnsby gets 6 for his head check to Linus Hemstrom, and Stevie Leskovar. This will have to carry over, I guess, in the next season, but 4 games for a slash to Evan Conyon, or maybe it just dies with the playoffs. Regardless, those were already handed out, and now we have Beckett Seneca and a real, what I thought looked very much like the Arnsby hit, Seneca on Kishana Aitchison in Barrie. And I don't know. I haven't heard anything as of yet, but your thoughts on what we've seen and what might still be to come.
Yeah, it's bizarre, right, to see all these key players going down to suspension. So I'll start off by saying the Matthew Mayich suspension, I'm still unclear exactly what it was for, so I can't comment too much on that regard. It was in the category of unsportsmanlike conduct, and there's all kinds of speculation about what that was. So without knowing, it's hard for me to sit here and say it was valid or not. But now I did see the other hits, all of them, and Liam Arnsby, that's a tough one. He's a hard hitting player. That's his brand. That's what he tries to do. I hated seeing Linus Hemstrom go down for the second time on a 5-minute head checking major to the same player in the same series. And the second time had to be carted off on a stretcher, which you never like to see. So the player injury there clearly factored in. The hit itself, there was some back and forth about, well, it looked like he came across and just got him with his head down, but there was a significant amount of head contact, potentially a little bit of a predatory hit coming across hard there at a vulnerable player. So generally speaking, in philosophy, I don't mind that one. Seneca, I saw that one as well. It didn't get a great angle. It looked pretty clearly like a glancing head blow as he came by. So I'm surprised we haven't heard more there a little bit. So, but with the game tonight, maybe there's nothing more to come of that. So whatever angle they had, it looked like maybe they thought it was more glancing and there was no injury. And now the Leskovar one, I'll just end on. I think that was full value. It was one of those accidentally on purpose type slashes when they came up out of a scrum. Leskovar, I mean, they had just taken a 5-minute major. They were killing a penalty. 15 seconds into that penalty, pile up on the faceoff dot. Leskovar stands up, and as I turn, I'm just going to make sure my stick comes across the back of the player's head. So, I mean, I have no problem with that too, because I think even Stevie Leskovar would admit there was intent there. Probably in the heat of the moment decision he regrets. Changed the series right there. I know Sudbury was in good shape as it was, but the basically 5 minutes of 5-on-3, scored a couple goals, got the momentum. They were right back in it. So anyway, that's my long-winded take on those penalties, Mike. I'm not sure if you saw things the same way.
I think across the board, I did. The Leskovar one reminds me of what we know goes on at the bottom of a pile when football players are going after a loose ball, right? The eye gouging, all kinds of different things that are happening down there. And I'll bet you 6, 7 times out of 10, you get away with them in hockey, but Leskovar did not. I'm fully on board with the penalty assessed. I agree completely. Look, I like a hard-nosed game as much as anybody does, but the Arnsby hit is exactly, to me, the kind of hit we're trying to get out of the game. And you slap 6 playoff games on somebody, you're sending exactly the right message, in my opinion. I'm a little concerned on the Seneca piece. This is a player that I love. You know that. I've been following him all year and pumping his tires as my prospect of the week on more than one occasion. But it was remarkably similar to the Arnsby hit, in my opinion. Difference being Aitchison pops back up, right? Ready to come back. Well, didn't pop right back up, but wanted to come back into the game. So the lesser injury, i.e. in Aitchison's case, none. And in Hemstrom's case, of course, he was done for the series. But that should not factor in, right? Is the hit the kind of hit we want out of the game? Yes. I didn't have the greatest angle. I saw one. It looked to me, though, like direct contact to the head. You either want it out of the game or you don't. And if you're going to slap 6 on Arnsby, I think you got to be looking the same way for Seneca. But as you mentioned, with the game underway as we speak tonight, I guess they're not going to be handing it out after the fact. You don't get to play games. Well, you know what? In the OHL this year, maybe you know what, game 6, but we'll apply the suspension to the next round if you're successful. I have no idea, but I thought they were remarkably similar, and I just don't like to see it. Just find a different point of contact for your heavy play in this league. Okay.
That's my take as well. I just don't like seeing it. And something made that helmet pop off. So uh, it didn't at that speed to have it pop off that violently. Like clearly there was a little more, something probably had to come of that. Now I know there were some accusations of some gamesmanship in that heat of the moment as well, where there's some accusations that Barrie coach Marty Williamson told Aitchison to stay in the tunnel until the refs made the call because he was returning to the bench saying he was fine. Said, no, let the refs think you're not fine for a while until they make this call. So I don't know if any of those things play in to the OHL's decision. But yeah, when you're in playoffs, emotions run high. And I think there's always going to be 2 strong sides to every story, but that's certainly my take. I just don't like seeing that head contact.
Emotions run high. That will factor into the conversation we have a little bit later when it comes to officials in this league and the coaches that have been tossed by them in the last few weeks. Before we get there, fans travel well in this league. It's one of my favorite parts about the Ontario Hockey League, Dan. Most of the teams, and we're very fortunate living where we live, right in the middle of it all, really, in the region of Waterloo. We're so close to so many teams, but fans love going to visiting buildings, and a building where you see a lot of hockey, of course, the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. You have noticed the very vocal Erie Otters contingent at the Odd.
Well, I just thought it was great, Mike, because on the way out of that, so it was a tough game 5 for Erie. It was a tough game 5 for both teams, but one of them has to lose. You go to overtime, Erie loses. On the way out of the building, I was overwhelmed by this contingent of Erie fans that I had to get through to leave the building, and it was, I assume, waiting for the bus to load or something. But there was just an enormous number of them. I thought it was great to see, Mike, to make that many fans to travel up on a weekday. Surely many of them taking the day off work, all that kind of stuff, incurring the expense, etc., to follow their team for that 4.5 hour trip across the border. That's what this league's all about. When you see that kind of healthy support for a team, I mean, I can't help but appreciate it, no matter who it is. And so kudos to Erie and the fans for getting behind your team. They deserve it. They're playing hard, and it's nice to see.
It is. And a lot of those fans, dozens of them for sure, have been very near my broadcast location in Kitchener. They are vocal, they are fun, they're having a good time. I friggin' love it. A little bit behind the scenes. When I was down in Erie last week, Stan Butler was griping a little bit. Well, you guys can't get them any better seats than way up there at the top. And I'm like, listen, Stan, I don't think, I mean, it's possible, but I don't think the ticket sellers in Kitchener are deliberately putting Erie fans further from the ice. You got to remember that in Kitchener, there are like 4,000 seasons ticket holders. And so they kind of take up all of those golds and reds down below. Nonetheless, it's a fair point. You don't want somebody being deliberately, put in a different part of the arena. But I will also add, my hometown bias notwithstanding, that there's not a bad seat in the house. You might be higher if you're up there in the Blues, but there's not a bad seat. There's no obstructed view or anything like that. And clearly the fans are still having a good time. One of the things I did want to mention is, well, two things quickly. I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding we get a lot, but think about it. While the team is based in Erie, 70% of the kids in the league are from Ontario. Most of these kids, like this is practically a home game for a lot of those fans. It's going to be parents, family, friends, etc. So they might not. Some I'm sure are making the trip all the way from Erie, PA. But I would venture to guess that for 90% of those Otters fans in Kitchener, it's like a home game for them, right? Because they're making a 1 hour trip instead of a 2 or 3 hour trip to get across the border and watch their kids. I see Rangers fans in every rink I go to all season long, and there have been a couple of dozen down in Erie for the playoffs as well. The only other thing I'll add to it is I hope, and I get to hear, it's just anecdotal stuff, and you probably hear it too, Dan, about how fans from Kitchener were in building X, Y, or Z, and they got treated like crap, and Erie fans were at the odd and they got treated like crap. It probably does happen. What I just wanted to say in all of this is, I wish it didn't. Like, can't we be better than that? Let the come in and cheer your hearts out, which I've heard these Erie fans doing. Cheer for your team, get a Go Otters Go chant going, have some fun, keep it clean, keep it respectful, and then the home team fans should treat you in similar fashion, because we don't need any of the nonsense. That's like, I hate that I even hear those stories, because I know they're true, or at least mostly true, and that sucks. Can't we just cheer for our favorite team even if they're in the other building?
It comes back to things we've talked about in this pod with the players going back years, Mike. It's just the golden rule. Don't be a jerk, right? And I think it's whenever you have a group, you're going to have the bad apples, right? And the group tends to be characterized based on their worst members. That happens everywhere in society. Groups are judged on their worst members. So let's remember most of them are not. But if you are those worst members, try not to be.
Yeah.
And just one last note on the Erie thing. I find this a little more humorous than anything, because it certainly doesn't bug me. I love how into it they are and how vocal they are. But guys, before you chant USA, USA, maybe just look at the birthplaces on your roster a little, okay? Just a little tip. That's all.
Fair. That's fair. Speaking of fans, Brantford has exceeded my expectations, says Michael Andlauer, the owner of the Brantford Bulldogs. I can unequivocally state, Mr. Andlauer is quoted as saying, that if council, this being in Brantford, commits to building this facility, I will commit the Brantford Bulldogs to playing here in Brantford long term. What council in Brantford, of course, is talking about is a new sports and entertainment complex, 5,000 seats. You can connect the dots pretty easily here. I know we've touched on this before, Dan, but Brantford, I hope you like having the OHL back, because it's a thing again.
Well, Brantford, you earned it, right? I mean,
They
it was
did,
kind of
yeah.
a show me. Like they stepped up to fill the void for Hamilton when they were in a bad situation, and there was a bit of a show me there. It said, well, let's show. And we talked about before, but at every level, from the public to the political level to the financial level, you name it, they all got behind this team. They all still continue to stay behind the team. And you have an owner in Michael Andlauer who has come out and said, if you show me this kind of faith, I'm going to show it back. And this is what we're hearing now. So I think it's unveiled itself to be a marriage made in heaven, I think, and it's going to continue, like you said.
Okay, we've covered what's been happening on the ice. A couple more things for us to still touch on, bigger picture issues. But I'm wondering this: is it okay in 2024 to still tell somebody to suck it up? And is it time, like finally time for real this time? I mean it, to get rid of the 3 stars. We'll discuss that and more, including our performers of the week still to come on this episode of the OHL podcast. All right, Dan, I referenced it earlier that this is something that we were going to get into, this being 4 coaches in the past 3 weeks having been kicked out of games by the officials on the ice. And I am admittedly struggling with this and struggling pretty mightily. So I'm going to try my best here to not get, no, I'm going to get on the soapbox. I'll try my best to not stay on it too long because I just have so many thoughts about it, and I really am having a hard time. The bottom line, if you haven't kept up with all of it, is this. It started with Jeff Kurzakis, the assistant coach in Kitchener, kicked out of a game and suspended then for 2. Michael Haley, the assistant in Sarnia, same thing, kicked out, suspended for 2. Al Letang, the head coach in Sarnia, same incident, same night, kicked out, suspended for 3. And the Sarnia Sting get a $2,500 fine as an organization. Those were all regular season. Fast forward into the playoffs, and Chad Wiseman loses his mind behind the bench after a late call that went against his team that ultimately ended up seeing the Sioux take game 3 with a power play that carried over into overtime. I say this because, that's why Chad Wiseman was as upset as he was. He's tossed from the game, but he gets to come back for game 4, and the team is assessed a $500 fine. So right off the bat, and all of this comes, of course, by virtue of abusive official. I might add that I saw, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but I saw John Dean absolutely losing his mind in game 1 of that series between Sioux and Guelph up in the Sioux. I don't know what he was losing it about, but I just knew, boy, if I'm on the other end of that, I'm pretty scared right now or intimidated, and nothing more came of that. I don't know what it was all about. I was just happened to see it when I was watching the game. But anyway, one of the things that stands out to me is the difference in penalties. So what did Kurzakis say that only got the 2-game suspension versus Haley and Letang in Sarnia that got 2 and 3 games plus $2,500? What did Wiseman not say that he's not suspended and the fine is only $500? I think there's a little bit of a story there to try to figure out, okay, so what is the line? And if I may make reference one more time to the movie Bull Durham, when Kevin Costner, as Crash Davis, just before he gets kicked out of the baseball game, he says to the umpire, "You want me to call you that name, right?" Like, and it wasn't until he used that word that he got tossed. So at least we knew in the world that was created in the movie Bull Durham that you say that word and you're kicked out of the game, or you call the umpire or referee that name and you're kicked out of the game. I don't think we know that in the Ontario Hockey League right now, but more than anything, and I'll get down off the soapbox in a minute, but I really think, Dan, this is starting to become the Ontario Hockey League's own version of cancel culture. And I use that carefully because I don't like this whole woke versus non-woke. I don't want to make this an ideological thing at all, but I'm using it because what I think happens here is we're saying, like, we're drawing a line in the sand, and I think the line might be kind of arbitrary, but basically we're saying this is the line, and if we think you've crossed it, you're gone. We're not going to work with you on it. We're not going to try to understand you at all. We're just going to kick you right out of the situation. And that's not helping anybody, which I might argue in the broader context is cancel culture. It's not helping. If we don't understand these things, I think there's nuance. I think there's reason and a need for conversation. I think if we really want to fix these things, if we really are serious, because officials, players, coaches, none of them should suffer abuse or harassment in there or at their place of work. Nobody should. So if we want to fix that, how do we go about fixing it? Here's what I will suggest to Hockey Canada. Do some empathy training with coaches, with officials, put players through it as well. Teach these young men, and in some cases with officials now women, about emotional intelligence. Because I know I'm getting a little deep and maybe a little corny here, but this is truly what I believe. If you get into this, I firmly believe, and all of this is premised on the fact that I believe sincerely in the 80-20 rule. I might even argue it's 85-15 in this case. And that is 80+% of people in this world are good people. They're trying to do good things every day. They're generally nicer than they are not nice. 80 to 85% of people in the world are good. The other 15 to 20%, they're jackwagons. And you're never going to be able to do anything with all the jackwagons. They're going to be jackwagons. But for those good people, then work with them, because we're all entitled to have bad days. We're human. We react with emotion in the heat of the moment, with so much on the line in hockey games, even in major junior hockey. Your bad moments are going to be magnified. It might be something just within that game, or you might come to that game because your parent is in the hospital. You had a big fight with your husband or wife. Take your pick. And all of these things will play into how you react in the moment when the pressure is on. If we help people to understand what is behind their actions and then help them deal better with their reactions, that's how we fix this. We're not going to fix it by kicking people out of the area of play, saying, nope, we're just not having it anymore. And that's it. Because guess what? We're not robots. And so we're going to come back and we're still going to be dealing with these emotions. We're going to be reacting to them. And we're not giving anybody the tools to do better, to communicate more, to understand the other, to empathize. All right, I'm getting a little too Dr. Phil here, but I think, boy, oh boy, if I do something wrong, if I make a mistake and you yell at me, I probably would prefer you didn't yell, but sometimes you might. And frankly, I was the one that screwed up. I probably deserve to be yelled at. And I got to be able to take it. That's all.
Fair enough. And so there's lots of layers to this. I couldn't agree with you more about the 80-20 rule, and those, unfortunately, that 20% that are jackwagons comprise probably 80% on social media. Right?
Oh, amen to that.
So I think there's issues there. But coming more to your point about giving a little leeway to people in their worst moments when things happen like this. So I just a couple quick points there, because you've covered it really well. But one being that we'll use the Chad Wiseman case. Yeah, there was not a consistent application of penalty there for sure after, in terms of the fine versus suspension for the coaches. But Chad Wiseman absolutely had a point there. And I would like to add in that this is their livelihood on the line here, right? So they lose a playoff series. It could mean their job. It could mean the job of the assistant coaches. It could mean there's a lot riding on this. It's opportunities for these kids. It's their playing career. It's their potential to get drafted in the NHL. So these calls are extremely big. So the last point I'm going to make here, and this might not be a popular one, but I'm just going to throw in there that, because I know we all cringe when we hear the term replay and review, but I will say that increased replay and review has lowered the temperature in a lot of sports. The automatic goal line review in the NFL, the increased replay and coaches challenges in Major League, there's been a lot fewer of these coach official interactions. So all I'm saying is that maybe we consider, in these super high temperature environments, like a tie game late in the playoffs in an elimination game, maybe we say, if there's a penalty called, the coach can challenge that and go to review. Because I have a feeling that all of this could have been avoided if they just took a quick iPad look at that call in Guelph and said, yeah, sorry, that actually wasn't a headshot. We're all good. Temperature comes down, no one's fined, no one's fired, no one's eliminated from the playoffs. I'm just saying, maybe we consider that, because the officials are also entitled to their mistakes, and sometimes they make them in big moments. So having the opportunity to rectify those before the molehill becomes a mountain is maybe a good thing.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, and I can understand why you'd make that argument. And in fact, I'd be completely and utterly opposed to it. And the only reason, Dan, is because this is where I think we're going. Unless we make an honest effort to meet each other with humanity, to understand each other as people, then that's where we're going to go, right? Do we want to have the game reviewed or officiated by robots and or computers? I don't. It's not played by robots and or computers. And I honestly, like, this is how far I've thought about this. Esports is a big ass deal these days, right? Well, if we keep on this path where we've decided that we just can't coexist in an emotionally charged hockey arena when there's a lot on the line, then we're just going to stop doing it. right? Because who's going to want to be an official? Who's going to want to be a coach? This and that. Everybody will just go become a general manager or a player in esports because the computers decide all of it. And that's where I really want us to work a little bit harder at this. And again, like, remember, I would, if I could skate well enough, if I could skate, I would honestly, even at my old age, I would want to get in there as an official. I get why Chad Wiseman was losing his mind. I get why Alatang and Michael Haley were upset. I get why Jeff Kurzakis was upset. If I'm the ref or I'm the liney in that situation, I'm right there and I'm owning it. I'm saying, you know what? I blew that call. But you know what? I can't do anything about it now. Like, it's done. So what are we going to do next? How are we going to move forward from this? You want the next call? Well, I'm not just going to give you the next call. So are you done yelling now? Is it over? Can we, like, what kind of message are we sending to players here? What do the fans think of you right now? I know you're upset, Chad. I get it. I screwed up. It's on me. Now, you know what? You got to get these boys in front of you ready to kill a penalty. I'm sorry. And I hope I don't screw up again. Like, easier. I know it's easier for me to say sitting here like this, but that's where we got to get, because we're not. And guess what? Chad Wiseman is going to respect that from the referee. He's going to respect it.
Perhaps, yeah. And I'm certainly not saying remove the human element and all that interaction from the game. I'm just talking about the 1-2% in those heat of the moments, having that ability to do that, because all I'll say is anyone who's seen Angel Hernandez's strike zone is not against robot umpires.
But see, it's funny you say that, because I was watching Angel Hernandez just this afternoon, and he had a pretty high strike zone. And I know it's like game 8 or 9 or 10 of the regular season, fine. But you could see when the batters didn't agree, you could hear a chirp or two from the dugout or notice that one happened. Okay. And then what does Angel Hernandez have to do? That's my strike zone today, boys. I called it a strike. Like, it's not changing. And I think that has to be okay. 2017 playoffs. I think I've shared this story before. Kitchener is playing Owen Sound. Game 1, Owen Sound is up 7-1 in the third period, 7-1 in the third period. And they throw their first power play unit out there to make it 8-1. Attack go on to win the game 9-2. Somebody asks me on social media after the game what I thought of Owen Sound sending out its first power play unit with a 7-1 lead. I said, it's a dick move. I didn't think anything more of it. I wasn't really meaning that head coach at the time, Ryan McGill, was a dick, but I called it a dick move. Thought nothing more of it until it got back to Ryan McGill. And then I realized that he is very upset with me because his interpretation is, you just called me a dick. Now, would I ever call Ryan McGill a dick to his face? Not a blinking chance, right? So I understand his interpretation, even though it wasn't my intent. 2 days later, the teams are going to play again. And part of my job is to interview Ryan McGill before the game. So did I look forward to that moment? No. But I went to McGill's office anyway, and I knocked on the door, and we had a discussion. And I made my apology and tried to explain myself. He had a lot to say to me in response. And then we shook hands, and he did the interview like the pro that he is before that game. If we had just said, you know what, Farwell called me a dick, I'm not talking to that guy anymore, then Ryan McGill and I still have a story. Not that it's not like we went out for dinner afterwards or anything like that, or he even remembers me to this day. But the point is, we could have just canceled one another and said, screw that guy. Instead, we had a conversation, we understood each other, and we moved on like adults. If we don't get to that in this game, we're in a whole heap of trouble.
No, fair enough. And oh wait, sorry, I just got a text from Ryan McGill. Oh, you don't want to know what he called you.
I deserved it.
It's a great point. It's be adults, right? Come down out of the moments, and you hear these stories all the time of coaches, players, officials that get into it, and then a year later they're having a beer and laughing about it and talking about it. So we can all be adults, and that sometimes involves losing your cool in the heat of the moment. So but yeah, don't hold grudges, don't take it personally. No one's I hope no one's, especially on the official side, is intentionally trying to screw any team here. So yeah, good to see that Ryan was able to you both were able to make the most of that situation.
The easy solution to all of this, of course, is just to stop making mistakes, right? That's not going to happen because we're human. And you nailed it right there, Dan. I just want to say again, we have to in like nobody's perfect. And sometimes we're really going to lose our cool. It's going to happen. And if we just cancel people when that happens, we're not going to help them lose their cool less often. That's where I come back to empathy training. Learn about emotional IQ. Teach these guys that Hockey Canada, there's your opportunity. Anyway, it's gone on long enough. I'm sure people have tuned me out by now, but if you want my Dr. Phil advice, reach out anytime. OHL podcast, Rogers.com. One more thing we did want to touch on, and I used to be on this one. See, showing how I can mature, believe it or not, Dan. I used to be on this all the time in this league because I thought the 3 stars were an embarrassment in some buildings. And frankly, I still think they are, but I don't waste time on it. But it popped back onto my radar this weekend when following a 6-2 game 5 loss, I think that was the final score, or was it 5-1? Either way, Mississauga gets eliminated by the Sudbury Wolves, and it was a lopsided score in favor of Sudbury. And still, the 3 stars of the game were all Mississauga Steelheads in the losing cause. And that was brought to my attention. I thought, oh, geez, like, come on, like, be better, Mississauga. And then I realized, oh, you mean those were the 3 overagers. So you gave them a little victory lap following their final game. Okay. What do you think of that, Dan?
Well, you know me, my whole take on the 3 stars is I never get too worked up about one way or the other. It never costs me more than an eye roll. And some say saying, yeah, right, okay. You know, your team lost 5-2 and you got 2 of the 3 stars. Like, come on. I laugh about it because my brother and I would joke. He's in Ottawa, and we joke about the Senators would show the period highlights, and you know the Senators could be down 3-1, and the period highlights were the Senators' goal and 2 Senators hits. It's like, well, who are you trying to fool here? So, like, when maybe with the 3 stars and maybe with these things, you're appealing to the kids in the audience, the casual fans. I'm not sure. It's kind of whitewashing things as far as I'm concerned. I'm of the belief that if you're gonna do the 3 stars, do them properly, honor the 3 people in the game. Now, I'm not offended that they give the overagers a last curtain call, the last game. Fine, but maybe just say that. Say, you know, final game. It's our tradition. Here's the overagers, so that you don't have people in stands saying, "What, we lost in 3 stars." So, but it's not something that I'm ever going to get too worked up about. I just believe that if you're going to do a job, try and do it properly.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. And my initial response was, oh, well, then I'm the idiot for complaining about these 3 stars because you were just recognizing your 3 OAs on their way out the door in this league. But you know, some others pointed out, and I can buy into this. I think it's a fair perspective. The OAs, as you know, Dan, in every rink get a little tribute in their final regular season game. So they've already been recognized. Why are we doing it again when the opportunity presents itself on the 3 stars? And I think that is a fair perspective. So it just makes me think again, but can I get really twisted up about this? I mean, we've spent a few minutes now discussing it on the pod, fair enough, but I'm not going to lose any sleep. I think what it comes down to more than anything for me now is, to your point, it's perfect. If you're going to do something, do it right. But I think it's time. Like, if we're just going to goof around with the 3 stars and we're going to be homers about it at one time, or we're going to make it all about OAs another time, I don't think we're taking it seriously as organizations, as a league. OHL, be the pioneers here. Get rid of the 3 stars at the end of the game. Award a player of the game, one to each team, and call it a night. And then we never have to have these conversations again. I think that's where we can go here. And the OHL could be a pioneer in that regard.
Not a bad point. And you know, even in that final game when you have Mississauga's eliminated, maybe you could do the 2 stars from the game, then the first star is a 3-way tie with the overagers. I don't know. Because all I'm telling you is if I'm one of the 3 overagers and you make me the 3rd star, I'm losing the gasket. I'm getting a league fine. I'm getting a suspension. Why was I the 3rd star? Are you saying I'm the 3rd most valuable overager on this team? I don't like it.
Everybody gets a participation ribbon, Dan. Just let's go back to what I was talking about before and the problems with this world today we have to sort out. All right, let's get down to brass tacks before we wind things up here this week. And that is our performer of the week. Who you got this week?
Well, with the caveat that there's a game going on as we speak, so this could totally trump my call. But I have to go back off the top, Mike, and I have to give my performer of the week to Sam Hillebrand. We talked about him and what Barrie has done, and largely on his back. Free agent signing by Barrie, second year in the league. where would they be without him right now? He is not just playing well; he's playing out of his mind in this series against Oshawa. The 936 save percentage, posted a shutout. One of the losses that Barrie has was the game he didn't play. I mean, and that's no indictment of Ben West either, but Sam Hillebrand has just been phenomenal in these playoffs. And whether or not they move on to the next round, unlikely against Oshawa, but you have to give a complete full credit to the performance he's put in, just willing his team into this series.
You 100% read my mind in every regard. How can you not? And frankly, I don't care how this series ends, Oshawa and Barrie. I don't think you can look back at the past week in the Ontario Hockey League playoffs and say there was anybody other than Sam Hillebrand for all the reasons you just mentioned. I can let you know, because you just made me think of it. As we wind up this episode, Oshawa is up 2-0 with just about a minute to go in the second, and Ottawa leads 2-0 end of the first. So the 67s looking to advance, Oshawa looking to advance. For reasons beyond our control, we had to record on Sunday. You're still getting this episode on Tuesday. Sam Hillebrand is our performer of the week, with an honorable mention to the suitcase, Easton Rye. We talked about him earlier in this episode. And round 2 beckons, Dan. We're just around the corner from getting into the final 8.
For sure. And because we tossed out an honorable mention, could I give a quick honorable mention to Andrew Oak as well? Because all I heard all year was how Saginaw was going to have to get themselves a goalie. Well, he just went through a 928 at us in the first round as well, and it swept his series. So honorable shout out to Andrew Oak. And yeah, round 2 coming up. So.
And your episodes will continue to be delivered on Tuesday mornings, because that's what we've always promised you. We usually just get to record them the night before as opposed to 2 nights before, but playoffs make things a little imperfect. He is Dan Mahar. You'll find him on Twitter at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm Mike Farwell on Twitter at Farwell_OHL. Send an email anytime if you want to pontificate about getting thicker skin and toughening up. OHLpodcast@Rogers.com, or tell us how wrong we are. We can take it. We've got thick skin over here too, but we're always happy to hear from you. And we really appreciate that you listen to the OHL podcast.